Crowley continued until his death in Hastings in 1947 in this same zigzag pattern. Life was a constant series of new involvements, new schemes, new disciples, money problems, litigation, and the copious consumption of drugs, particularly cocaine and heroin. Crowley had initially taken drugs as a shortcut to the higher consciousness, enabling him, in a phrase of the times, to loosen the girders of the soul. But the problem, as Crowley was to discover, was that if you loosen the girders of the soul too often, the whole edifice begins to tilt in the most alarming way. So perhaps it's not surprising that when, in 1939, Robin Cecil, then a fresh-faced youth in his 20s, met Aleister Crowley, who was then in his 60s, he describes him as a ruin, bloated yet ravaged. Crowley's health was failing, but he was still on the lookout for new followers, convinced that he would still get the recognition he deserved, that somehow someone was going to turn up.
Getting to know Crowley was rather like exploring a ruin. Ruins have always fascinated me. Crowley always thought that I had been attracted by his personality and that I'd made all the running. I don't think this is really true, but Crowley thought that for me this had been a very important episode in my life. And as soon as he found that I was quite interested in the ideas he had to peddle, one of the first things he instructed me to do was to write a short history of my life, culminating in the moment at which I had met him, because in his view this was a culmination for me.
Robin Cecil wisely concluded that however interesting these ideas appeared to be, that here was a man who should be treated with the utmost caution. Later on, when he stayed alone in Crowley's flat in Jermyn Street, he found the atmosphere of the place deeply depressing, as though reflecting the underlying melancholy and frustrations of the owner.
In spite of the fact that I was dead tired and that one was missing a lot of sleep for other reasons, I found myself caught up in a sort of miasma. I felt the whole atmosphere of this place laden with the frustrations of a lifetime. And I think Crowley got to me through the suffering which had imbued the very walls and furniture of this flat of his, and which I was capable of sensing. And so, although perhaps I never got a very good grasp of Crowleyanity, I did have a feeling that this was a man of great potential who had lived a sad and wasted life.
Yet in old age, Crowley was still just as capable of assuming roles as he had been in his youth. He was particularly fond of posing as the English gentleman, and could still turn up correct in every detail for lunch. Angela York.
I did like Aleister Crowley. My husband used to have him to the house once a week, and we used to give him lunch. And he used to, instead of, one has this picture of him with his strange clothes and curious lip, but not at all. He used to arrive in beautiful cut tweeds, and the tweeds were made by some woman who used to weave them for him. And his conversation was very normal. I was a very conventional young woman, and I would have been shocked, I'm sure, if I'd heard anything, but I wasn't at all. Later he came to us in Cambridge, and then I had a child of 3. And what I was very struck was he was so nice to the little boy. He had he had one of those pencils you had in those days, a gold pencil, that had little bands, and you push them up, and a red pencil came out, or blue pencil, or black pencil. And I remember him showing John this thing, and John being fascinated.
Yet the sinister and manipulative side of Crowley's personality was never far below the surface, as Arthur Calder Marshall recalls.
When I met him in Zurich, he was sitting there, and I thought, my God, you're a phony. He did not impress me as anything more except somebody who was out to get something out of me. He obviously felt that here was somebody who, if he could possibly induce him to come down and act as a sort of neophyte like he'd made Raoul Loveday and Victor Newberg, he was onto a good thing.
Arthur Calder Marshall accepted the invitation and saw Crowley's techniques of persuasion in action.
He invited me down because he wanted me, obviously, to spend the night, and he would, if possible, hypnotize me, give me drugs, make me tight, and see if he could seduce me into becoming a neophyte. But instead of that, I went down with a girlfriend of mine who drove me down, which absolutely infuriated Crowley. Crowley didn't know how to get rid of this girl, and so he summoned his wife, who was about his fourth or fifth, a Brazilian woman who looked as though she was dressed for a brothel. And she came down in a black and white long evening dress and high heels. And this woman was sent out to the garden with my girlfriend. It was October, to look at the Brussels sprouts in slight drizzle. While Crowley seated me at a table, he was smoking specially strong little Brazilian cigarettes wrapped in Indian corn sheaths. And he plied me with brandy and talked to me very earnestly indeed, looking into my eyes as hard as possible. And I realized that he was trying to hypnotize me. And I knew that if he'd had me all night, I might have given way if I got tight. But I knew I also had Eleanor out in the garden who was going to come back, rescue me, and take me to London in her car. But I did realize at that point that if he got you alone, Crowley was a very sinister man.
With a character as complex as Crowley's, can there ever be any kind of final summing up?
I think during his life, one would have to write him off as a magical failure. He ended life, after all, still a magician, in a Hastings boarding house, writing curses in the bathroom of the loo. And one just feels pathetic old black magician. But in fact, wickedness survives. Crowley, whom I thought after his death would be written off as a sort of complete clown, has revived his cult. Charlie Manson, who ritually massacred Sharon Tate, claimed to be a follower of Crowley. And I believe in the United States, as in England, there is I think it's called the OTO, which is a form of the Crowley worship.
So Crowley's reputation has survived his death, and to a certain extent has grown and become internationally known. His magical order still flourishes in several countries, notably in the United States, where it has a monthly newsletter, The Magical Link, and Gnostic masses, followed by potluck lunches afterwards for the Californian followers of Crowleyanity. So, what is the final summing up of Crowley? A man of considerable talents who squandered them all? Or an authentic new prophet who went unrecognized in his own time? Or simply a very nasty, plausible conman who just wanted power at any price? Above all, will he be remembered? Francis King thinks it's too soon to judge.
Certainly from the point of view of most of us who, have jobs and pay a mortgage and, want to be a member of the urban district council or something, the man used them in an utterly futile way. Whether this will be the view of someone in 200 years is a different matter.
That was the fourth programme in our series, The Mischief Makers. Taking part were Arthur Calder Marshall, Robin Cecil, Francis King, Angela York, and the voice of Aleister Crowley himself. It was presented by Francis Donnelly and produced by Graham Tyre. Next week, at the same time, you can hear the last programme in the series,